Chapter 21. Two of Banat's men arrived with Mateo shuffling between them, his head bowed. His wet shirt trembled in the wind. She curbed the urge to run to him and throw herself into his arms. No, she didn't have that right yet. They were friends. She replayed the intimate moment from last night, the heavy touch of his hand on her face, the strange dichotomy of being so angry, then letting it go as she comprehended the bigger picture. Was that friendship? Was that the drive to see him every day, to talk with him every night, something that happened to friends? The only friend she'd ever truly had was Zuri, unless she counted Sonara, which seemed different. Vittoria and Zuri laughed together, giggled over her strangely shaped letters or her simple incantations that went awry, like the day she turned sand into an azalea, but had wanted azult, a delicious bread made from grains that grew like melons in the farms. Vittoria set those thoughts aside as Mateo approached. Friendship or not, she'd feared for him, and he'd clearly survived. She forced her shoulders to relax and her fists to loosen. Mateo stopped several paces away, just outside the beach house. 5 of Banat's men ringed the perimeter and kept wary eyes on the horizon, the beach, and beyond. Vittoria devoured Mateo with her eyes. His hair was waterlogged and covered with sand. He looked pale and exhausted, but he was alive and on his own feet. Mateo met her gaze as Banat's men returned to their positions, leaving the two of them alone. "Are you all right?" "Fine, I promise. Just weary." He held out his hands, which she accepted in hers with relief. His calluses against her fingertips proved all the reassurance she needed. His wet shirt felt cold, translucent even in the torchlight. "You passed." He twined their fingers together, and her heart sang at the affectionate look in his eyes. "I passed. And Romeo?" A shadow fell over his gaze. "He passed as well, but I don't know how. I was too tired to ask. He finished just after me with only seconds to spare." Darkness had fallen over the beach like a quiet blanket, revealing a few stars ahead of the impending storm. She felt disoriented with both relief and despair. A successful test of magic behind them meant they'd advanced. There was still hope. It also meant he had to kill his brother. Vittoria squeezed his hands. "I'm sorry, Mateo." He studied her, then pulled her body against his and held her. He smelled like salt water and seaweed. His shirt was cold against her arms and wetted her dress, but she didn't care. His weight sagged against her for a moment, and she accepted it. If she let him, she had no doubt he'd fall asleep on his feet. "Come inside. You can tell me everything in the morning after you rest." Relief and uncertainty permeated the foggy air the next morning. While the ocean rolled outside under a white sky, Vittoria sat at the table next to Zuri, drinking sweetened hot coffee. Zuri skimmed through a newsbook that Banat had brought, murmuring under her breath every now and then. "They're saying you're in league with the rebels." Zuri's finger tapped the front page. Then she flipped several other pages. "But back here, they say that you saved 3 landowner wives from certain death when a bat attacked and then turned into a rebel at the ball. Why are bats always considered bad animals?" She muttered with a shake of her head. When she lifted her gaze to Vittoria's, amusement brightened her face. "You had a busy night at the ball, simultaneously destroying the network, yet saving the landowners. Are you tired from all that?" A hint of a smile rose to Vittoria's lips. "Very tired." Zuri patted her arm. "Have a drink. We're going to start transformation today. You never know when disguising yourself could save your life. I was most impressed with your everyday household incantations. Please, use your magic to clean the dishes whenever you like. If only my children learned to do that, my life would have been easier. Not that we had dishes to do." Vittoria did laugh this time as Zuri grabbed an empty plate. "Do you miss having young children at home? I miss Nico, and he's not truly mine." Zuri inhaled, then grinned. "All 3 of them were monsters when they were little, but I loved it. What I was able to see of it, anyway, when I wasn't working. Now they made grandbabies for me, and they live with me, so I'm very happy, especially since Mateo found me." Vittoria frowned. All the time they'd spent together in lessons, and Vittoria still didn't know that much about Zuri's life. "How did he find you?" Zuri stood with her hip propped against the table, brow wrinkled. "My husband died 6 months ago, so I was alone in my closet of a house in Nechikoven. One night after his death, a rebel riot started at a nearby landowner tavern, and the flames spread. La Salvatore came in, woke me. He pulled me out of my house before it collapsed. In the process, a board fell on my head and knocked me out. He and Bernat nursed me back to health here." She lifted her arms. "And I stayed until I was better. Then he offered to pay me to help him with the food basket, and now to help you." Vittoria felt a sense of affection for Mateo rise within her. He collected witches who needed help, then sent them back on their feet to take care of themselves and help others. If there was any better definition of a giver, she couldn't think of it. That was the network she wanted for Aniko, and that was the network Mateo fought for. "You do the food preparation at home now?" Zuri smiled warmly. "Mateo helped me find a place where my children and grandchildren and I could live together. I prepared the food and blankets there. I didn't want to be parted from my children, so we still lived together." With that, she spun and headed for the kitchen, plates in hand. It left Vittoria in the silence of the house, save for the swish of water and rattle of dishware. She eyed the open newsbook, able to pick out a few words: landowners and Vittoria and High Priest. Zuri had been teaching her the most pertinent words first, even if they were longer. Vittoria leaned back against the wall, adjusting herself on the floor cushion. The low table was right at her arm height as she reached for the coffee and sipped. Thick, from the sugary pastry used to sweeten it, but zesty all the same. Her mind wandered back to a brief explanation of the test of magic Mateo had given her and Bernat before retiring to bed. Sea worms, gods, magic. Every day, she felt more overwhelmed by this world that she knew little of. Until she'd escaped Mayfair Coven, she hadn't realized that workers lived in bubbles, starving bubbles, desperate bubbles, bubbles that kept them ignorant of the world around them. On purpose, no doubt. They knew so little. How could they ever survive were the system to break? The sheer amount of magic Mateo must have used to win awed her. No doubt his work as La Salvatore helped enable such a feat. He'd spoken of the different magic systems he'd studied for years as he searched out incantations that would aid his work as La Salvatore, unknown magic that the Guardians weren't trained to anticipate or sense. "You feel magic mostly," he had said through a yawn. "Sense it. When you're familiar enough, it's a part of you." She opened her fingers and studied them, as if her magic resided there. So far, magic felt like nothing more than words and study, like laundry, taking something from one state to another. Magic was more like cold, unexplained science than mystery. She felt no emotion about it yet. Then again, she and magic were reluctant acquaintances. With a shake of her head, she turned her thoughts. There wasn't time to focus on any of that. The test of courage and test of magic lay behind them. Now, she had to think about moving forward in the 2 weeks before Mateo would face his brother. In other words, it was time to find Esperanza. Jode's whispered words at the ball were a stark reminder, but he'd revealed something else, hadn't he? "There is much for you to discover." And, fortunately, the chaos at the ball had revealed that she knew a rebel after all. "Allo?" Mateo's sleepy morning voice came from just behind her. Vittoria straightened as he sat in the chair next to her. "Allo, you look like death." Before he fell asleep, he'd bathed the salt water out of his hair, which had dried in silky locks this morning. She barely kept her fingers from winding through the strands. Wrinkles still lined his weary eyes, but he wasn't so pale today. He fought off a yawn. "I was going to say better." She smiled at him. "But yes, you still look as if you have some recovering to do." He winked as Zuri bustled back into the room, a pile of things in her arms. A wooden spool of sewing string, an apple, a carved duck, a string of seashells, and a half-dead flower with leaves so thin they were as translucent as onion skin. "Of course." Zuri sent him a sharp glare as she set each item down on the table across from Vittoria. "You would wake up just as I was going to start a transformation lesson with La Principessa. Now I have to go make your breakfast and interrupt my flow. Your trouble, Majesty." He grinned at her. "I will happily get my own breakfast, Zuri. Somehow, I survived on my own for years. And it's a wonder to us all. No, I won't stand by and let you burn the house down. Thank you, but I'll grab it before we start." The twinkle in her eye as she slapped his shoulder and brushed past them gave Vittoria a little smirk. Bluster aside, Zuri thrilled at any opportunity to take care of someone else. Mateo settled back against the chair and rubbed a hand over his face. Vittoria stared at the items on the tabletop, wondering what Zuri would have her transform them into. Her thoughts were scrambled now that Mateo was in the room. Not knowing which direction to nudge them, she let them go. Thinking around him wasn't easy. He sucked up all her attention with his kind eyes. Mateo blinked out of his own tunnel, then turned to her. "Balta sent me a letter this morning." His voice was low and quiet, like the gentle roll of the ocean. "The battle with Romeo will be in 2 weeks." 2 weeks and the world will be decided, she thought. Mateo would be alive or dead. Before she could feel her fear or ask how he felt about having to kill his brother, he continued. "Tonight, I would like to bring La Principessa and La Salvatore together in downtown Necci officially. We have appeared together, but not with you declaring yourself as La Principessa. Tonight, I want to announce it. Are you ready to truly be her?" Her entire body rebelled. She wanted to scream, "No!" But how could she refuse when he'd almost died fighting for the network last night? He seemed so fearless, so unafraid of what he was throwing himself into. He deserved loyalty, at least. Still, she trembled at the thought. She wasn't a giver, and didn't want to lie. But in some ways, she was a giver. Some perceived her that way, at least. Could she take that hope away? "Yes," she finally said. He smiled at her hesitant response. She felt the warmth in his gaze all the way to her bones, as if he sensed her trouble and wanted to reassure her. Seconds later, his expression darkened. "I am concerned for the workers in Necci Coven. Bernard's men reported to me just now that Romeo sent guardians into the city last night to seek revenge for the ballroom incident." She clenched her fist around her dress. "Is he piking them?" "He's trying to, yes." Vittoria straightened, her coffee forgotten in a sudden burst of dread. "But how could he know who they were? They all wore robes. There's tens of thousands of workers in the whole network. Someone may have lied about it being the Necci Coven." Mateo shrugged but appeared troubled. "He likely doesn't know, so he'll punish whoever he can find. He's already been on a rampage. My contacts say that 10 witches were piked early this morning." "Then let's go." She started to stand, but he pulled her back down. "Not yet, Masuna." The endearment calmed her, but she wasn't assuaged. "I cannot just sit here. What if—" "It's why I want La Salvatore and La Principessa to be seen together. The workers need hope more than ever. We'll be out all night if you can manage it. There is nothing we can do this moment except get ourselves killed in the daylight." His tone suggested he was saying it more for himself than for her. "The rebels acted, and innocents will bear the consequences. That's why the rebels are so dangerous." "But this is wrong." "I agree." He put a hand on her flushed cheek. "Tonight, we will try to make it right, but we must be wise. While we wait, let's gather supplies to distribute. Bernat and you and me will make a plan. It's likely that Romeo will act dramatically at night. Do you agree?" Her thoughts settled into an unusual calm. Thanks to his steady voice and reassuring gaze, it was clear to her. He was right. Acting rashly, no matter how much she wanted to, wouldn't serve anyone. With Aniko and her family safe, she had the luxury of waiting without as much fear. Finally, she nodded. "Then I ask that you listen to me whatever I say tonight." He let his hand fall from her face, and she wanted to call it back. "It may require some courage to stand as La Principessa, but we will keep you safe." "I will." He smiled and brushed a warm finger down her cheek. "You'll do beautifully, Masuna." She longed for him to cup her chin and dissolve her into a kiss, to feel the heat and strength of his body pressed against hers in a physical reassurance that went beyond words. There was so much unknown between them, even if they were betrothed. Did she want to invest so much emotion into a man who might die in 2 weeks? Instead of drawing his lips to hers, she settled for soaking up his touch. "We leave at twilight."